Eli Marsh sat beneath the flickering neon glow of his tiny booth on the edge of Sector 9's marketplace, a forgotten corner of the galaxy's busiest spaceport. His stall was nothing special, just a rusted metal table, a dusty tarp overhead, and a crooked sign that read Earth Relics and Tools. All cheap, all real. Most who passed by gave it no more than a glance. A few laughed at the word Earth, as if it was some kind of joke. To the larger galaxy, Earth was a backwater planet with nothing to offer. And Eli? He was just a nobody trying to sell junk no one wanted. He adjusted the collar of his faded jacket and sighed. Another long, pointless day. He glanced at the clock. Only 2 more hours before shutdown. If he didn't make at least one decent sale, he wouldn't even be able to pay for his stall space tomorrow. A group of elegant Averic traders passed by, tall, lizard-skinned beings wrapped in golden robes. One of them sniffed in Eli's direction and turned away, nose wrinkled in disgust. Figures, Eli muttered under his breath. Behind him, the pile of unsold gadgets, wires, and half-working tools loomed like a graveyard. Some of it he didn't even understand himself, just stuff he scavenged from old cargo ships or picked up from other traders. Most of it was worthless, except maybe one thing. At the bottom of the pile, buried beneath tangled cords and a broken translation unit, was a small palm-sized device shaped like a silver crescent moon. It had no buttons, no lights, no markings. Just smooth metal, cold and silent. He'd found it inside a crashed freighter weeks ago. He'd tried selling it before, but no one could identify what it did. Eli picked it up, rubbed it with his sleeve, and sighed again. Come on, mystery junk. Work your magic. He placed the strange object on the center of the table, hoping its shape might catch someone's eye. Maybe if he pretended it was valuable, it might sell. Hours passed. Nothing happened. The sun above the spaceport dome shifted into artificial dusk, casting deep shadows across the marketplace. Most traders were already packing up. Eli rested his chin on his hand, eyes half closed, when he heard a sudden hum. It was soft at first, barely audible. Then it grew louder. The crescent-shaped device began to glow. Eli jumped to his feet, knocking over a box of wires. What the? A sharp pulse of blue light burst from the object, shooting straight into the sky. It was silent, but the entire spaceport seemed to freeze. The humming deepened into a low vibration that Eli felt in his bones. High above, the sky inside the dome shimmered. A ripple of golden light stretched across the artificial heavens like a spreading crack. People stopped in their tracks. Conversations died mid-sentence. Shopkeepers emerged from behind their counters. Traders dropped their goods. The crescent pulsed again. This time, something answered. A long, echoing tone, deep and ancient, resonated across the marketplace. No one knew where it came from or what it meant. Panic stirred in the air. Eli stared at the device, heart pounding. What did I just do? Suddenly, alarms blared. Ships in the upper docks powered down automatically. Lights flashed red across the port. The voice of the central AI stuttered and failed. From the sky, a flash of purple lightning split through the dome, and something massive began to descend. A ship unlike anything seen in 100 cycles hovered just above the ground. Its shape was smooth, dark, and silent. No engines roared, no landing gear extended. It simply hovered. Unnatural, regal, terrifying. The crowd backed away, murmuring in dozens of alien languages. The ship opened with a hiss. A ramp extended, and from it descended a woman, or something like one. She was tall, taller than any human. Her skin shimmered like polished obsidian. Her hair was silver flame. Her robes moved without wind, glowing with patterns that danced and shifted like living light. Her eyes, they weren't eyes. They were stars, burning with ancient power. She walked directly to Eli's stall. Not a glance left or right. No guards, no weapons, just her. And when she stood before him, she dropped to one knee. Gasps filled the air. The whole marketplace watched in silence. She looked up at him, voice like music and thunder blended together. I have heard your call, and I obey. Eli blinked. What? You hold the royal link. By the sacred codes of my ancestors, I am yours to command. He laughed nervously. Lady, I think you've got the wrong guy. I'm just trying to sell this thing. You summoned me, she said firmly. The bond is sealed. I am Queen Zharelia, first Empress of the Myriath stars. And I am now your slave. The crowd erupted into chaos. Some screamed. Some bowed. Others ran. Eli just stood there, frozen, as the alien queen lowered her head again, waiting for his command. He swallowed hard. Oh, no. And far above, hidden in orbit, dozens of eyes turned toward him. Some full of awe, others full of hate. The human who had done the impossible. The salesman who had bound a queen. But Eli Marsh had no idea what he had just started. A stunned silence held the market in its grip for what felt like eternity. Eli Marsh couldn't breathe. He couldn't move. He couldn't even think. All around him, traders, travelers, and station workers stood like statues, eyes locked on the surreal sight before them. The most regal being they had ever seen kneeling before a dust-covered human stall, declaring herself the slave of a nobody Earth salesman. Some people whispered in fear. Others laughed in disbelief, but no one dared approach, except for security. The enforcers of Port Authority, clad in black armor with glowing visors, came marching in through the perimeter gates. Their steps were synchronized, heavy and fast. Weapons were drawn. The lead officer barked orders into his comms as they formed a perimeter around Eli's stall. Step away from the alien, one shouted, aiming his plasma rifle at Eli. Hands where I can see them. Eli's hands shot up instantly. Whoa, whoa, I didn't do anything. But no one was listening to him. Not really. They were staring at her. Queen Zharelia slowly rose from her kneeling position. She did not look startled. She did not seem alarmed or threatened. Her expression remained calm, serene even, as though the arrival of armed soldiers meant nothing to her. Her gaze swept across them with quiet authority. One of the officers moved closer and shouted, "You're interfering with galactic peace protocols. State your origin and intentions." The queen tilted her head slightly and smiled, almost sadly. "I am Zharelia, sovereign of the Myriath Crown Realms," she said, her voice gentle but powerful. "I am here by the law of bonding. I belong now to the human who summoned me." A wave of disbelief passed through the officers. One of them hesitated and tapped at a device on his wrist. The hologram that blinked to life above his arm confirmed the name, Zharelia of the Myriath Throne. And beside her name, a red warning pulsed, galactic-level sovereign. Approach with caution. The lead officer lowered his weapon a fraction. That can't be. Eli, meanwhile, stood frozen. His heart thundered in his chest like a drumbeat. He wanted to speak, wanted to say that this was all a mistake, but his mouth had gone dry. The queen stepped forward, placing herself between Eli and the soldiers. By activating the royal link beacon, she said, "This human has performed the rite of summoning. Ancient law binds me now. I will not resist. I will not rebel. I am his to command, and his protection is mine to ensure." One of the younger officers scoffed. "He's a vendor. Probably didn't even know what he was holding." "Exactly," Eli said quickly, raising a hand. "Look, I didn't mean to summon anybody, all right? I didn't even know this moon-shaped thing was real. I was just trying to sell it for lunch money." The queen glanced at him, and for the first time, her expression softened. "I know," she said quietly. Before anyone could react further, a low rumble shook the ground beneath them. Everyone turned as the queen's massive ship lifted slowly into the air, vanishing into a cloak of invisibility with a quiet hum. No smoke, no fire, no engine noise. It simply disappeared. Dozens of drones flew overhead a moment later, recording everything. A small floating reporter bot buzzed in, lights blinking furiously as it scanned the scene. Galactic News Corps live feed initiated. The bot chirped. Breaking. Alien Queen pledges loyalty to Earth human. Is this the start of a new era, or the end of the known galaxy? Stay tuned. Eli groaned. Great, that's just what I needed. By evening, the news had gone viral across the galaxy. Galactic forums lit up with theories, arguments, and panic. Some believed it was a hoax. Others were convinced Eli had discovered a forgotten relic of immense power. A few radicals screamed that Earth had secretly developed mind control tech. Some even demanded that the Queen be rescued from human slavery. And through it all, Eli was taken to the central port chamber for containment and questioning, while Queen Zharelia followed him silently, unbound, unguarded, and undeterred. Inside the sterile, metallic room, a high-ranking official from the Interplanetary Peace Guild leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled, eyes scanning Eli from head to toe. She was a sharp-jawed, no-nonsense alien diplomat with orange skin and thin antennae. "You understand, Mr. Marsh," she began, "that what's happening here could spark a galactic incident. I understand I just wanted to sell some junk, and now I have a 7-foot glowing woman calling me her master." Eli replied, rubbing his face. "Trust me, I'm not happy about it either." Across the table, Queen Zharelia remained standing, her hands folded, her eyes calm. "I offered myself freely," she said. "He did not coerce me. The royal link is sacred. Only one who carries the sole signature of worth may activate it." Eli raised an eyebrow. "The soul what now?" "You have a heart of truth," she explained. "That is rare among rulers, even rarer among conquerors. But in you, the beacon saw something worthy." He laughed weakly. "You're seriously telling me I got chosen to? What? Rule you?" She shook her head. "Not rule. Command. I am your shield now. Your sword. Your servant." The diplomat leaned forward, her face tense. "Queen Zharelia, your empire is one of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. Surely you understand the consequences of this kind of binding." Zharelia looked directly at her. "Yes, that is why I chose him." The room fell silent. The diplomat tapped a button and dismissed the guards. Then she looked at Eli, her tone different now, almost fearful. "Do you know what you've done?" she whispered. "You've triggered the Royal Bond Protocol. That law predates most governments in this sector. It cannot be undone unless you release her, or you die." Eli went pale. "Okay, let's go with the first option. Then." "I refuse," said Zharelia instantly. Eli turned toward her. "But I don't want a slave." "You don't understand," she said softly. "It's not about ownership. It's about trust. I chose to serve you because I see what others do not. The galaxy sees power as domination. I see power as protection. I would rather serve one good man than rule 1,000 liars." Eli didn't know what to say. He slumped back in the chair, stunned as the diplomat stood and walked out, murmuring something about containment protocol updates and panic management. Left alone in the room with the alien queen, Eli looked at her with wide, tired eyes. "This is crazy," he muttered. "This has to be a dream. I sell scrap. I live in a broken-down ship. I eat protein cubes for dinner. You're a queen." She smiled. "And you are now more than you were." Just then, the lights flickered. A strange sound, metallic and sharp, echoed down the hallway. Zharelia's smile faded. She stood instantly, alert. Eli looked up. What was that? Without answering, Zharelia stepped toward the door and placed a hand on the metal. Her skin glowed slightly. "They're here," she whispered. "Already." "Who's here?" Eli asked, standing slowly. She turned toward him, her expression grim. "The ones who want to kill you before the bond takes root. The ones who fear what we might become." And in the shadows of the security wing, a dark figure loaded a plasma rifle, whispering into a comlink. "He's marked. The order is confirmed. Kill the human before midnight." The game had begun. And Eli Marsh, who just wanted to sell old tools and eat a warm meal, was now the most wanted man in the galaxy. Night on the orbital station looked different than night on Earth. There were no stars to gaze at through windows. No crickets chirping, no wind to whisper through leaves. The light dimmed artificially, simulating rest hours, but the station never truly slept. Beneath its quiet surface, 1,000 lives moved in secret, some in shadows, some in silence, and some with deadly purpose. Eli Marsh was still trying to figure out if he had completely lost his mind. He sat on the edge of the narrow bunk in the temporary diplomatic residence assigned to him, a room far nicer than his usual living conditions, with soft lighting, smooth floors, and furniture that adjusted to his comfort levels. Even the temperature was automatically tuned to his biometrics, and yet none of that made him feel safe. Across the room, Queen Zharelia stood near the window-like holographic screen that projected views of the surrounding stars. Her arms were folded, her eyes distant, yet her posture radiated alertness. She hadn't moved in over an hour, like a statue carved from cosmic fire. Eli had tried to sleep, but his mind wouldn't stop spinning. He had activated some ancient alien relic. He had summoned a galactic queen. And now, not only was she calling herself his slave, but he was also being hunted by assassins from half the galaxy, with political diplomats trying to control the fallout. All because of a stupid crescent-shaped piece of metal. Eli leaned back, rubbing his temples. This can't be real. It just can't be. Zharelia turned her head slightly. "It is." "I didn't ask for any of this," he muttered. "I know," she said. He sat up again, staring at her. "Why aren't you mad? Why aren't you angry that you're bound to some guy who sells power converters and busted comm units?" Zharelia didn't respond immediately. When she finally did, her voice was calm, but something in it trembled. "Because I am free for the first time in centuries," she said. "Not in power, not in command, but free in purpose." Eli blinked. "That makes no sense. To you, maybe, but not to me." She looked back at the stars. "I was born into a crown, forced to lead, forced to fight. Everyone around me wanted something. Control, riches, war. No one ever asked me what I wanted. Not until now. Not until this." Eli stood and paced. He didn't know how to respond to that. He didn't understand half the things she said. And he definitely didn't understand how someone like her, a living goddess in alien form, could be talking to him like they were equals. But before he could say more, the lights in the room flickered. A long hum filled the walls. The holo window blinked out. The door sealed with a loud clank. Zharelia turned fully toward the door, eyes narrowing. "Someone's coming," she said. Eli felt a chill run down his spine. "Station maintenance." "No," she said, already walking toward him. "Someone who intends to kill you." The room went dark. A sharp hiss echoed through the air. A sliver of gas slipped through the ventilation panel near the ceiling. Eli coughed once, then twice. The taste was metallic, wrong. Zharelia raised her hand. With a faint hum, a glowing shield of golden light formed around her and Eli. The gas dissipated instantly where it touched the barrier. "Stay behind me," she said. Eli didn't argue. The wall to their right exploded inward with a sudden blast, sending smoke and debris flying across the room. A tall, armored figure stepped through the rubble, face hidden behind a black mask. A red visor glowed where eyes should be. The assassin didn't speak. He just raised his arm and fired. The plasma bolt moved faster than sound, slicing through the air like a bolt of lightning. Zharelia moved faster. She caught the shot with her bare hand. The energy sizzled, crackled, and dissipated against her palm like water hitting fire. The assassin hesitated, only for a second. It was enough. Zharelia lunged. Her form became a blur of movement, her robes turning into a whirl of light. In 2 steps, she closed the distance and drove her hand into the assassin's chest plate. The armor cracked. The assassin staggered backward, and she grabbed his weapon midair as he dropped it. With her free hand, she sent out a wave of golden energy that flung the intruder against the far wall, pinning him in place. Eli stared, mouth open. "That was amazing," he said. She didn't smile. Her voice was ice. "He's not alone." As if on cue, 3 more dark shapes descended from the ceiling, silent, swift, like shadows with claws. Zharelia raised her arm again, and this time, the light around her pulsed outward in a protective bubble. They hit the shield and bounced off, snarling in languages Eli couldn't understand. She turned to him quickly. "You must leave. Now." Eli's eyes widened. "Where? I don't even know how to." She pressed a small disc into his hand. "Teleport beacon. Just think of your ship." He glanced down at the device, panic rising. "But you." "I'll follow." She turned back to the attackers. Eli closed his eyes and pressed the beacon. With a flash of blue light, he vanished. When he reappeared, he was standing inside his tiny junker ship, still half full of broken tech and grease-stained clothes. The place smelled like home and old engine oil. He collapsed into the pilot's seat, heart pounding. She said she'd follow, but she didn't come. Seconds turned into minutes, and then a noise at the hatch. It hissed open, and Zharelia stepped through, blood on her arm, her robe torn, but her eyes shining. "You're safe," she said simply, then collapsed to her knees. Eli rushed to her side, catching her before she hit the floor. "What happened?" he asked, trying to stop the bleeding. She took a shaky breath. "They were trained to kill royalty. They knew my weaknesses. They were sent by someone close." "Who?" Eli asked. "Who would do this?" She looked up at him, pain flashing across her face. "My brother." Eli didn't know what to say. The woman who had just saved his life was a queen being hunted by her own blood. And now, because of the bond they shared, he was part of a galactic game far more dangerous than anything he'd ever imagined. The question wasn't whether he would survive. The question was what he would become. And far above, on a distant throne world cloaked in black spires and silver clouds, a man in crimson armor watched the footage of the failed assassination attempt. He leaned forward, eyes glowing cold. "The bond must not take hold," he growled. "Kill the human, or destroy everything." The ship's interior lights flickered softly as it drifted through the quieter side of the station's orbit, cloaked and still. The chaos of the earlier assassination attempt was behind them, for now, but Eli could still feel its echo in his chest. He hadn't slept in nearly a day, and neither had she. Queen Zharelia lay stretched across the padded bench in the ship's small medbay. Her wounds had mostly closed, thanks to a healing device from her realm, a silver orb that floated above her, humming gently while sending soft pulses of light into her skin. Eli sat nearby, watching the process in silence. He wasn't sure what shocked him more, that he was now considered the master of an alien queen, or that she had bled for him without hesitation. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a leader. He was just Eli Marsh, used to being ignored, forgotten, overlooked by everyone from port officials to other traders. He had lived most of his life in the background. But now, the galaxy was looking at him, and someone had tried to erase him. He rubbed his hands together nervously, then stood up and walked over to the console. With a few awkward taps, he scanned for outbound communication signals, hoping none were tracking them. Everything seemed quiet. Behind him, Zharelia stirred. "You do not trust the silence," she said, her voice still soft, but awake. Eli turned. "Silence hasn't been a good sign lately." Zharelia sat up slowly, brushing her silver hair back over her shoulder. Her eyes, though heavy, still burned with something more than fire, something ancient and far too familiar with pain. "I apologize," she said. You should not have been dragged into this. You didn't drag me, Eli replied. I was dumb enough to power up a glowing alien device in the middle of a market full of pirates and smugglers. This is probably on me. She gave him the smallest hint of a smile. But I do have questions, he continued. You mentioned your brother sent the assassins. Why? I mean, if you're the queen, how does your own family turn on you? Zharelia's smile vanished. Her expression became distant. There was a time when my name alone silenced star systems, she said slowly. When my voice could command fleets to rise and fall. My people believed in dominance, conquest, legacy. We ruled with precision and pride. She closed her eyes. But I saw another way. Eli leaned forward, listening. I wanted change, she continued. Not through war, but through understanding. Not all races needed to be ruled. Some needed to be heard. I visited Earth once, centuries ago. Secretly, I watched how your people love stories. How they dream, even when dreaming seems useless. You were primitive then, loud, scattered, but full of strange hope. That hope stayed with me. Eli blinked. Wait, you've been to Earth? She nodded. Only for a few hours, but it left a mark. He sat back, processing that. You were the first alien visitor, and nobody knew. That was the point. She stood now, her robe torn where the plasma blade had cut it, but her posture was proud. When I returned home, I declared that our war fleets should stand down, that the outer systems should be given independence. I wanted to change the soul of the Empire. My brother, Commander Ralsith, saw this as weakness. He called it betrayal. The council listened to him. Eli felt a sick feeling in his gut. They turned on you. They tried to, she said. But as queen, they could not challenge me directly. Not unless I triggered the one law. They could not stop. The royal link, Eli said slowly. She nodded. By activating it, I bound myself to someone outside the Empire. Someone they could not control. I believed the beacon would choose someone who represented the hope I once saw on your world. He stared at her in disbelief. And that's me. Zharelia stepped closer, her gaze gentle now. You may think little of yourself, Eli Marsh, but the beacon does not choose by chance. It searches for one who has endured disappointment, survived without bitterness, and still chooses kindness. Eli looked away. He didn't know what to do with that kind of compliment. He wasn't used to being called anything other than average, or worse. But still, he muttered, that makes you a fugitive now. And me, a target. Yes, she said without flinching. They will come again. Harder, smarter. They will not stop. He sighed, pressing a hand against his face. Great, so we're running from an empire. She placed a hand on his shoulder. Not running. Preparing. Her touch was cool, but it steadied him. Preparing for what? He asked. For what comes next, she said. The pact is not just symbolic. The longer it holds, the more our bond strengthens. That means we can access each other's gifts, skills, knowledge, and eventually, power. Eli raised an eyebrow. Wait, like superpowers. She smiled faintly. Something like that, but only if we survive the next trial. As if on cue, the ship's alert system chimed. A red symbol flashed on the console. Eli rushed over. Someone's trying to hack into our cloaking field. Zharelia was already beside him. She moved her hands across the console in a blur. Her fingers danced across holographic symbols he didn't recognize, and for a moment, he just watched her work. She wasn't just powerful. She was brilliant. It's a tracking algorithm, she said. Someone from the outer sector. Low-tier tech, but persistent. They've narrowed our location. Eli felt panic rising again. So what do? We make a move before they do, she said. There's a planet not far from here. Uninhabited, long forgotten. But deep in its crust lies something old, something from the age before the empires. Eli frowned. Something like another artifact. Zharelia met his gaze. Something that can reveal the truth about you, about why the beacon chose you. I had hoped it wouldn't come to this. But if we're to stand against what's coming, you must know who you really are. Eli's heart pounded. He wanted to laugh, to scream, to disappear. But instead, he just nodded. Okay, he said. Let's go. And far across the stars, on a shadowed moon orbiting a dying sun, Commander Ralzith stood before a burning altar, gripping a jagged blade in his gauntleted fist. The bond is growing, he whispered, and with it, the danger. If my sister's path completes, the Empire falls. He raised the blade and slashed the air, a tear in space forming before him, revealing the path to the forbidden planet Zharelia had just mentioned. She will not make it, he growled. I will end this. And him. The chase was far from over. And the secret of Eli Marsh was only beginning to awaken. The planet was called Caltheri, though most maps didn't bother naming it anymore. Once, perhaps, it had been part of a thriving trade route or home to an ancient civilization. But now it was just rock and ash, a quiet, forsaken place drifting along the edge of a dim star, wrapped in silence and dust storms that howled without end. Zharelia's ship broke atmosphere in a stream of golden light, its hull wrapped in protective shielding against the turbulent winds below. Inside, Eli stood near the viewport, watching the barren surface grow closer. Mountains like shattered bones rose in jagged peaks. The sky was an angry gray, lit by occasional bursts of electric blue lightning dancing far in the distance. He had been quiet for the past hour. Not out of fear, not exactly. But out of a strange, building pressure inside his chest, something he couldn't name, couldn't shake. It wasn't just nerves, it was more like a calling, like something on that dead world was waiting for him. Zharelia moved gracefully to his side. Her wounds had fully healed. The torn robe had been replaced by one made of woven star thread, flowing behind her like liquid night. Her presence, as always, was quiet but undeniable. You feel it, don't you? She asked softly. Eli didn't answer at first. Then he nodded, like something pulling me forward, like I've been here before, even though I haven't. She studied him for a moment, then said, the bond is growing. The longer we remain connected, the more you'll begin to remember things not your own. Some knowledge comes from me. Some comes from far older places. The ship landed with a quiet hum, sinking into a clearing surrounded by jagged cliffs. Outside, wind rushed across stone in long, mournful moans. Eli grabbed his jacket and stepped down the ramp, the air sharp and dry against his skin. Zharelia walked ahead, leading him across the rocks with steady, sure steps. Her eyes glowed faintly, scanning for something unseen. She paused near a strange formation, 3 stone pillars bent in a crescent arc, partly buried in sand. This is it, she whispered. Eli frowned. Doesn't look like much. It's not what you see, she replied. It's what lies beneath. She placed her palm against the largest stone, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then the symbol beneath her hand began to glow, casting the pillars in pale golden light. The ground trembled. A circle of the earth slid open. Beneath it lay a staircase, descending into complete darkness. Eli swallowed hard. Ladies first, he offered with a weak smile. Zharelia raised an eyebrow. They entered the ancient corridor together. The passage below was narrow, the walls lined with metallic veins that pulsed faintly in their presence. As they moved deeper, torches of blue flame lit on their own, reacting to their steps. Strange glyphs, half language, half art, lined the walls. Eli couldn't read them, but some part of him felt like he should have. He slowed his pace. Zharelia noticed. You recognize it? I don't know, he said quietly, but they feel familiar. She gave him a knowing look but said nothing. At the end of the passage, they reached a domed chamber. In its center sat a throne, ancient, cracked, and shimmering with veins of light. Around it were statues of forgotten kings and queens, their faces worn smooth by time. And above it all, etched into the ceiling, was the same crescent symbol from the beacon that started everything. Eli approached the throne slowly. His footsteps echoed in the quiet. "This place," he said. "What is it?" Zharelia stepped beside him, her voice reverent. "This is the Hall of Convergence, built long before my empire existed, before most of the galaxy learned to write. It was a place of prophecy, of choosing. The throne doesn't belong to rulers," she said. "It reveals them." Eli raised a brow. "I don't want to sit on a throne." "It's not about what you want," she said. "It's about what the galaxy needs, and what it remembers." A low hum began to fill the room. The throne lit faintly, reacting to Eli's presence. He felt dizzy. "I'm not a king," he whispered. "No," she said. "You are something rarer." Eli stepped forward, drawn by something unseen, and touched the throne's armrest. The world blinked. Suddenly, he was somewhere else. Not in body, but in mind. Images flooded his senses. A war that stretched across star systems. A line of warriors, human in shape, but wrapped in living light, standing against the dark. A voice, deep and ancient, echoing across time. "He will be born among the forgotten. He will walk with doubt, speak with truth, and lead with heart." Eli gasped. He stumbled back as the vision faded. Zharelia caught him before he fell. He clutched his chest, breath shallow. "What was that?" "A memory," she said, "from the throne's spirit. You are part of something that began long ago. You are not just a random man. You are a thread in a much older tapestry." Eli stared at her, unsure of what to believe anymore. "I don't want to be a hero," he said. "Neither did the first ones," she replied. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the chamber. The walls shook. Dust fell from the ceiling. Zharelia spun toward the exit. "They found us." From above, something huge descended into the chamber with a thundering crash. A soldier clad in black and red armor, eyes burning with rage. A voice rang out. "Zharelia, you break our blood bond and kneel to this thing." "Commander Ralsith." Zharelia moved protectively in front of Eli. "You have no place here, brother," she said coldly. Ralsith sneered. "You chose him over your people, over your family. Now he dies." A blade of dark energy erupted from his arm. Eli took a step back. But something inside him shifted. The throne behind him pulsed again, and the crescent symbol on his hand glowed, marking him with light. Zharelia turned to look at him, eyes wide. "You're awakening," she whispered. Ralsith lunged. But this time, Eli didn't flinch. He raised his hand, and the air around him shimmered. A shield formed, blocking the strike. The impact threw Ralsith backward, sending shockwaves through the chamber. Zharelia stared at Eli. So did Ralsith. "You?" the commander growled. "You've touched the throne. You carry its flame." Eli stood taller now. "I don't want power," he said, voice steady. "But I won't let you hurt her." Zharelia smiled faintly behind him. "Then you've already become more than they ever were." Ralsith snarled in fury, retreating into the shadows with a promise. "This isn't over." And it wasn't. The bond was deepening. The prophecy had begun. And the man who once sold scrap at the edge of the stars had just taken his first step towards something far greater. The ship was quiet again. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. No, this silence was different. It was the kind that carried weight. The kind that hung in the air like smoke after a battle. Eli sat alone in the central chamber of the ship, the pale blue glow of the control panel casting long shadows across his face. His hands trembled slightly as he stared at the glowing mark on his palm. The same crescent that had summoned Queen Zharelia. The same symbol now pulsing with a quiet rhythm that matched his heartbeat. He still didn't fully understand what was happening to him. He had touched that ancient throne, and something had woken up inside him. Not just memories, not just strange visions, but power, real power. It was subtle, not like lifting spaceships with his mind or shooting lasers from his eyes. It was something deeper, a connection to the very fabric of the cosmos. Something old, something sacred, something dangerous. He felt it now, humming in his chest like a distant engine warming up. And he was afraid. From the far end of the ship, soft footsteps approached. Zharelia entered the chamber, moving more slowly than usual. She no longer wore her regal robes. Instead, a simpler tunic of smooth obsidian cloth hung from her shoulders. Her hair was loose, falling in silver waves, and her face, though calm, looked tired, no longer the untouchable queen, but someone closer to human, closer to him. "You've been quiet," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Eli looked up. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore." Zharelia walked to him and sat across the console. For a long moment, she said nothing. The silence stretched between them, not cold this time, but thoughtful. "I remember the first time I touched the throne," she said at last. "I was barely of age, surrounded by my father's court, expected to take the oath of rule. I was afraid too, not of failing, but of what it would turn me into." Eli listened. "It didn't make me stronger, not right away. It just opened my eyes," she continued. "It showed me the cost of leadership, of responsibility. Power is not about dominance. It is about choosing to carry the burden others cannot." He leaned forward, voice low. "And what if I don't want that burden?" Zharelia looked at him with something like sympathy. "Then you will still carry it, because the galaxy has already placed it on your shoulders." He stood, pacing the chamber. "I'm not ready," he said. "I didn't grow up for this. I've made more mistakes than I can count. I've been overlooked, ignored, forgotten. I'm not a hero, Zharelia. I'm not a leader. I'm just a guy who tried to sell a glowing rock to make a few credits." She stood too, slowly. "And yet," she said, walking closer to him, "the throne chose you. The beacon chose you. And I chose you." Eli looked at her, searching her face. "Why?" he asked. "Why would you give up your throne, your armies, your empire, to kneel to someone like me?" Zharelia stepped even closer, close enough that her breath brushed his cheek. Her eyes no longer glowed with cosmic fire. They looked soft, real. "Because you didn't ask for it," she said. "Because you didn't want to use me. Because when you had every reason to walk away, you stayed. That is the kind of soul the galaxy has forgotten. And it's the kind it needs most." He turned away, eyes burning. "I still don't know what I am." "I do," she whispered. "You're becoming the one who can change everything." A chime echoed from the control panel, breaking the moment. Zharelia moved to it, fingers dancing across the interface. She froze. "What is it?" Eli asked. She stared at the display. "There's a signal, buried deep, hidden in the throne's resonance pattern. It wasn't meant to be found easily." He stepped closer. "What kind of signal?" Her voice lowered. "A key to something forbidden, something even I was never told." Eli's heart skipped. "Where?" Her eyes rose to meet his. "A dead world, one not found on any modern maps. A planet wiped from memory by ancient order, but its name still echoes in the throne's core." She tapped the display. Salorith. Eli had never heard the name, but it struck him like a bell ringing in the dark. "What's there?" Zharelia hesitated. "A relic, older than the thrones, older than the empires, something that existed before time kept count. It's said to hold the last truth. And the final choice." Eli frowned. "Choice. The power that made the first rulers," she said slowly. "And the curse that came with it." He took a deep breath. "Sounds like something I should probably touch." She smiled, only slightly. "It could kill you." Figures, he said. But even as he said it, he knew he would go. Because something inside him was changing. Not just powers or visions. His thoughts were clearer. His doubts, though still loud, were quieter than before. He wasn't ready to call himself brave, but he was no longer willing to run. Not with the galaxy watching. And not with Zharelia at his side. The ship changed course. They didn't speak much on the journey. There were no more lessons to teach, no more speeches to give, just quiet understanding between two people who were no longer queen and servant, no longer protector and protected. They were something else now, something deeper. And far away, in the frozen crypts of Salorith, something old stirred. It had waited eons. It had watched rulers rise and fall, stars burn and vanish. And now it felt the pulse of the chosen one nearing. The throne's last key, the final trial, and perhaps the last hope of all. Salorith was not a planet. It was a grave. Not of bones, or blood, or even flesh, but of time itself. A forgotten place buried in the silence between galaxies, unreachable by ordinary ships, unrecorded in any modern archive. Its existence survived only in echoes, woven into fragments of prophecy whispered by dying stars and mad seers. Zharelia's ship emerged from Slitstream in orbit around the ancient world, and for a moment, everything fell still. The planet below was dark and cracked, its surface scorched and broken. Great towers jutted from the crust, like the ribs of some long-dead beast. No clouds moved, no wind stirred, but something, some force, watched from below. Eli stood at the viewport, arms folded tightly across his chest. The mark on his hand burned, but he didn't flinch anymore. He had stopped fearing it. He was changing, not into a weapon, not into a king, into something entirely new. Zharelia stood beside him, expression unreadable. She had said little since they left Caltheri, though her eyes often lingered on him, not in judgment, not in doubt, but in quiet awe. She could feel it. The shift, the awakening. "We don't know what's waiting for us down there," Eli said quietly. "No," she agreed. "But I know who's going down there." He looked at her. "You," she said. He didn't argue. The descent was silent. No resistance, no storms, just a slow drop into stillness. When they touched down near a shattered plaza of black stone, it was like stepping into the bones of a dream. The surface was littered with symbols older than written language, carved deep into the earth. Pillars stood in strange formations, casting no shadows despite the glow from the ship's lights. A long path stretched forward, flanked by obelisks that hummed low with invisible energy. At the path's end stood a gate. It wasn't built. It wasn't carved. It simply existed, etched into reality itself, a tear in space shaped like a doorway. Its edges shimmered like oil and water, colors that didn't belong to this universe bleeding through its borders. Zharelia paused, sensing something. "I can't go with you," she said. "This place was made for the chosen alone." Eli stepped forward, heart pounding. "How will I know what to do?" "You won't," she said gently. "But it will know what to do with you." She touched his cheek. "You were never meant to rule by force, Eli. You were meant to teach the galaxy what it forgot. That worth isn't measured by power, but by compassion." He nodded, then stepped through the gate. It felt like falling into a memory. The inside was vast and endless, a cathedral of stars and silence. Floating before him was a figure, not a man, not a beast. A being made of light and shadow, with 1,000 eyes that held the wisdom of the universe. It spoke without voice. "You are late," it said. Eli didn't speak. He couldn't. Long have we waited for the final one. The last soul worthy of the burden. The one to break the cycle of crowns. The being circled him slowly. "You were born of dust, a seller of scraps, a forgotten man on a forgotten world. And yet, you carried mercy in your bones, even when the galaxy showed you none." Eli found his voice, I didn't ask for any of this, which is why you were chosen. A pulsing object floated forward, small, dull gray, unimpressive. The being said, "This is the seed of sovereignty, not a weapon, not a throne, but a choice." Eli hesitated. What kind of choice? With it, you may rewrite the bond. You may command armies, shake galaxies, rule forever. Or, you may end the order, shatter the line of dominance, free all who serve under chains. Eli looked down at the seed. He thought of his old life, the long days in silence, the cheap meals, the hopelessness, and he thought of Zharelia, of her kneeling not out of fear, but out of faith, of how she looked at him not as a master, but as a man who mattered. He closed his hand over the seed. "I choose freedom," he said. The universe shifted. Light exploded across the chamber. The being smiled with all its eyes. "Then you are truly the last sovereign, and the first of the new dawn." Eli opened his eyes. He was back on the surface. The gate had vanished. Zharelia was waiting, eyes wide with wonder. He walked to her, no longer carrying the mark on his palm. Instead, his entire body radiated a quiet light. Not blinding, not showy, just right. "What happened?" she whispered. "I let it go," he said. "The chains, the bond, all of it." She stared at him. "But that means I'm free." He nodded. "And yet," she said, stepping closer, voice trembling, "I still want to stay." He smiled. "Then stay, not as my slave, not as my shield, but as my equal." She reached for his hand. Their fingers laced together, no longer by force, but by choice. Above them, the sky of Salorith shifted, revealing the stars beyond. And far across the galaxy, something strange began to happen. Armies laid down their arms. Thrones cracked. Chains turned to dust. It began as a whisper, a name. Not of a conqueror, not of a king, but of a salesman. Eli Marsh, the human who unbound a queen and taught the stars how to be free again. And so began the new reign, not of domination, but of dignity. Not of fear, but of hope. The galaxy would never be the same, and it was better for it.